The bacon moment. The smell hit her first. Bacon. Real bacon sizzling and sweet, cutting through the antiseptic air of the field hospital, like a memory she had never been allowed to have. Greta Schultz sat upright on the metal cot, her left arm wrapped in clean white bandages, her whole body shaking from something that wasn't cold and wasn't fear. Not anymore. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes walked toward her carrying a metal tray. On that tray sat 3 strips of crispy bacon, scrambled eggs, still steaming, a slice of white bread with a pat of butter melting into its surface, and a tin cup of coffee with real cream swirling on top. The April morning light came through the broken factory windows behind Hayes, turning her into a silhouette, and for just a moment, Greta thought she might be dreaming. But the smell was too real. The hunger twisting in her stomach was too real. And when Hayes set the tray down on the small table beside the cot, Greta could see the grease pooling around the bacon, could see steam rising from the eggs, could see her own reflection warped in the surface of the coffee. "This is what you give to prisoners." The words came out in broken English, each syllable catching in her throat. Greta had been taught English in school back when schools still had books and heat and teachers who weren't grieving sons lost on the Eastern Front. But she had never used it like this. Never used it to ask a question that felt like it might crack her chest open. Hayes smiled, not a cruel smile, not a mocking smile, just tired and genuine and impossibly kind. "This is what we give to everyone. Even your officers ate this yesterday." Greta stared at the bacon. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. The meat was still warm, still crispy at the edges. She lifted it to her mouth and bit down, and the taste exploded across her tongue with a complexity she had forgotten food could have. Salt and smoke and richness and something underneath it all that tasted like abundance, like waste, like a country that could afford to give this to its enemies. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and then the tears came. They came fast and hot and unstoppable, running down her face and dripping onto the white bread, turning it soggy. She tried to stop them, tried to remember her training, her oath, the 6 years of propaganda that had been hammered into her skull since she was 13 years old. But none of it mattered, because this bacon, this simple breakfast, this careless kindness had just shattered something fundamental inside her. Hayes sat down on the edge of the cot. She didn't touch Greta, didn't try to comfort her with empty words. She just sat there close enough to be real and waited. What could a simple breakfast do to a 19-year-old German girl who had been taught her entire life that Americans were barbaric monsters? The answer would shatter not just her beliefs, but the beliefs of thousands of German prisoners across Allied camps. This is the story of how bacon kindness and a doctor's oath defeated Nazi propaganda more effectively than any bomb ever could. But to understand why that bacon made Greta cry, we need to go back 11 days earlier to the moment she became a prisoner and the lies she had been living under for 6 years. Greta's indoctrination. Greta Maria Schultz was born in Kassel, Germany in the autumn of 1926, when the Weimar Republic was gasping its last breaths and the future was a dark promise whispered in beer halls. Her father, Otto Schultz, taught mathematics at the local gymnasium until 1933, when teaching mathematics became less important than teaching loyalty. By the time Greta turned 7, Otto wore a brown uniform to school and taught equations with one hand while raising the other in salute. She was 10 years old when they came for her. Not with force, not with threats. They came with songs and banners and a sense of belonging that felt like love to a girl whose mother had died of pneumonia the winter before. The Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls. The future of the fatherland, they said. The mothers of the new Reich. Greta learned to march in formation. Learned to sing songs about blood and soil. Learned that Jews were parasites, that Slavs were subhuman, that the British were weak and the French were corrupt, and the Americans were the worst of all, capitalist monsters, slavers, savages who had slaughtered the noble Red Indians and now turned their weapons on the civilized world. The teacher showed her photographs. American soldiers, they said, though the images were so grainy and distorted that the men in them looked more like demons than humans. They showed her drawings of American cities where black people hung from trees and starving children begged in the streets. They told her that America was a dying empire, rotting from the inside, and that when Germany won the war, those same starving Americans would be the ones begging for food. She believed it. Of course she believed it. She was 10, then 12, then 15, and every adult she knew told her the same story. Her father told her. Her teachers told her. The girls in her unit told her. Even the propaganda posters plastered on every wall in Castle told her. If the Americans catch you, Otto said one night in 1943, sitting across from her at the dinner table with his Wehrmacht uniform still on and his eyes hollow from whatever he had seen on leave from the Eastern Front, you must not let them take you alive. They will torture you, rape you, feed you to bomb. Death is better than surrender. Do you understand? She nodded. She was 17. She understood. By September 1944, Otto was dead. Killed somewhere near Smolensk, the telegram said, though it offered no details about how or when or whether he had died quickly. Greta folded the telegram into a small square and put it in the wooden box where she kept her mother's wedding ring and her own confirmation certificate. Then she reported to the recruitment office in Kassel and volunteered for the Luftwaffe Auxiliary Corps. They gave her a choice: ammunition factory or radio operator. The factory meant 12-hour shifts surrounded by TNT and cordite hands turning yellow from chemical exposure, lungs filling with powder that would kill you at 40 if the Allied bombs didn't kill you first. The radio meant training, learning, a chance to serve without destroying her body in the process. She chose radio. The training took place in Hamburg in a concrete building that still had most of its windows and a functioning heating system. There were 120 girls in her class, all between 18 and 22, all chosen for their aptitude with numbers and languages and their ideological reliability. They learned Morse code and radio frequencies in aircraft recognition. They learned how to take coordinates from a radar station and translate them into targeting information for the 88mm anti-aircraft guns that ring German cities like steel flowers. On the last day of training, Hauptmann Klaus Weber stood before them in his pressed uniform and his Iron Cross and told them what would happen if they were captured. You are the daughters of the Reich. You wear the uniform. You serve the fatherland. But you are still women, and the enemy knows this. If the Americans or British or Russians capture you, they will not treat you as soldiers. They will treat you as animals. They will starve you, beat you, violate you, throw your bodies into mass graves and forget you ever existed. This is not propaganda. This is fact. We have reports. We have testimony. We know what they do. He paused. Let the silence stretch. You have one duty if you are captured. Do not let them break you. Do not let them use you for their entertainment. Death before dishonor. Do you swear? 120 voices rose in unison. Wir schwören. We swear. Greta said the words with her hand over her heart and her eyes locked on the flag hanging behind Weber's head. She meant them, every syllable. She would die before she let the Americans touch her. They assigned her to Kassel Anti-Aircraft Battery 47 3rd Division. 28 women and 6 male officers operating out of a fortified bunker complex on the northeastern edge of the city. Her job was simple: sit at the radio, listen for the radar reports, convert the numbers into coordinates, pass them to the gun crews. Watch the sky light up with flak and know that somewhere up there an American bomber was dying. She was good at it, fast and precise and calm under pressure. The officers praised her. The other girls looked up to her, and her best friend Ilse Hartmann, a girl from Munich with blonde hair and a laugh that sounded like music, told her she was wasted on radio work. You should be an officer, Ilse said one night in their shared bunk, both of them too tired to sleep and too wired to relax. You're smarter than half the men here. Greta smiled in the darkness. Women can't be officers. Not yet. But after we win, maybe they will be. After we win. The phrase became a talisman. After we win, everything will be better. After we win, the Americans will stop bombing. After we win, there will be food again, and heat again, and fathers coming home. After we win. But by March 1945, even Ilse had stopped saying it. The collapse came fast. Not like an explosion, more like a wall giving way under pressure it had been holding for too long. One day the radio reports talked about strategic withdrawals. The next day they talked about regrouping. The next day they stopped talking at all, and the only sounds coming through the static were American voices speaking English and laughing. On April 2nd, the order came to evacuate Kassel. Battery 47 received the message at 0400 hours. Hauptmann Weber gathered the unit in the bunker and told them the truth with a flatness that made it worse. The Americans have crossed the Rhine. Kassel is surrounded. The Wehrmacht is falling back to defensive positions east of the city. We cannot hold. We have been ordered to destroy all equipment and retreat on foot to the rendezvous point 80 kilometers west. Someone asked about transport. There is no transport. The trucks were destroyed by enemy aircraft yesterday. We walk. Someone asked about supplies. There are no supplies. Carry what you can. Move fast. Stay off roads. Ilse raised her hand. What if we encounter American forces? Weber looked at her with eyes that had stopped believing in anything. You know your orders? Death before dishonor. They left at dawn. 28 women and 3 officers. The other 3 officers had deserted during the night, taking a vehicle and whatever food they could carry. No one spoke about it. No one had the energy. Greta walked with her rifle slung over her shoulder and her pack digging into her spine, and Ilse beside her singing quietly under her breath. They moved through forests and across fields and past farmhouses where old men and women watched them with expressions that could have been pity or contempt or just exhaustion. They ate raw potatoes pulled from frozen ground, drank from streams that tasted like metal, slept in barns and abandoned buildings huddled together for warmth, while the sound of artillery rolled across the landscape like distant thunder. On the 3rd day, Ilse stopped singing. On the 4th day, 2 of the girls collapsed and couldn't get up. Weber left them with a morphine syringe each and kept walking. On the morning of the 5th day, they reached a river crossing near a small village whose name Greta never learned. The bridge was intact. On the far side sat an American checkpoint, 2 jeeps, 12 soldiers, a 50 caliber machine gun mounted on a tripod. The unit took cover in a grove of trees 200 meters from the bridge. Weber used his binoculars to study the checkpoint. Then he turned to the women and laid out their options. We can try to cross at night, hope they don't see us. Or we can go upstream and find another crossing, which will add 2 days to our march and we don't have food for 2 days. Or we scatter and try to slip through individually. What about surrender? Margaret Cole asked. She was 22, blonde, the daughter of a banker. Before the war, she had studied literature. Weber lowered the binoculars. Surrender is not an option. Why not? We're out of food. Some of us are wounded. The war is lost. The war is not lost. Margaret laughed. It was a terrible sound. Look around, Hauptmann. Where is the Wehrmacht? Where is the Luftwaffe? Where is the Führer's secret weapon? The war is over. We lost. Weber's hand moved toward his sidearm, but he didn't draw it. He just stood there, breathing hard, and finally he said the thing they had all been thinking. If you surrender, you're on your own. I won't stop you, but I won't join you. He walked away. 2 other women followed him into the trees. The rest stayed, 7 of them. 7 women in torn uniforms with empty packs and hollow eyes sitting in the dirt beside a river, in a country that no longer existed, debating whether to walk into the arms of the enemy or die trying to avoid them. Ilse looked at Greta. What do you want to do? Greta looked at her arm, at the filthy bandage wrapped around a wound she refused to examine, at the blood seeping through the cloth, at the fever heat radiating from her skin. I don't want to die. Then we surrender. They waited until noon when the soldiers at the checkpoint looked bored and the sun was high enough to make them squint. Then they stood up, all 7 of them, and walked out of the trees with their hands raised and their weapons left behind in the dirt. The American soldiers saw them immediately. Rifles came up, voices shouted in English, but no one fired. A sergeant stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform that looked clean and new and impossibly intact. He lowered his rifle and stared at them like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Jesus Christ, they're just kids. The soldiers lowered their weapons. The sergeant walked toward them, slow and careful, his hands visible. Anyone speak English? Greta stepped forward. Her legs shook. Her vision swam, but she forced the words out. I speak English. The sergeant stopped 3 meters away. What's your name? Greta Schultz. How old are you? Greta, 19. He looked at her arm, at the blood, at the way she swayed on her feet. You're hurt bad. We've got medics, doctors. We can help you. Greta felt something crack inside her, some wall she had built to keep the fear contained. It shattered and the terror poured through. You're lying. You'll torture me. Kill me. The sergeant's face softened. No, kid, we won't. I promise. We're going to get you to a hospital. He turned and called over his shoulder. Miller radio for medical transport. We've got wounded POWs. Then he opened his pack and pulled out a chocolate bar. Hershey's. The wrapper crinkled as he peeled it back and broke off a square. He held it out to Ilsa, who stood closest. You girls look hungry. Ilsa took the chocolate with shaking hands. She stared at it like it might be poison. Then she bit into it and her eyes went wide. The sergeant smiled. It's just chocolate. We've got plenty more where that came from. That chocolate bar was the first crack in Greta's worldview, but it would take something far more powerful to shatter it completely. And that something was waiting for her 40 miles away in a converted factory that smelled like disinfectant and hope. The Jeep ride blurred together. Greta sat in the back beside Sergeant Tom Bradley from Oklahoma, her wounded arm cradled against her chest, her mind spinning. Every bump in the road sent pain shooting up to her shoulder. Every time the Jeep slowed, she expected them to stop and shoot her. But they didn't. They just drove. Bradley tried to make conversation, asked her about Castle, about her family, about what unit she served in. Greta answered in monosyllables, her voice flat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Why are you being kind? She finally asked in German, and Ilsa translated. Bradley shrugged. Why wouldn't I be? You're just a kid with a hurt arm. War's almost over anyway. No point being cruel now. Greta didn't understand, couldn't understand. 6 years of training had taught her that Americans were monsters, that they delighted in suffering, that kindness was a weapon they used to make you trust them before they struck. But Bradley's kindness didn't feel like a weapon. It felt real. The hospital appeared through the trees like something from a dream. A massive brick building that had once been a textile factory, now surrounded by tents and vehicles and soldiers moving with purpose. The smell hit her before they even stopped. Disinfectant and blood and something else. Something clean. They carried her inside on a stretcher. The ceiling was high and vaulted. Electric lights hung from chains. And everywhere, there were wounded men. American and German side by side on identical cots being treated by the same doctors and nurses in the same white coats. Greta stared. This couldn't be real. This was propaganda. A trick. They were going to photograph her, use her for some newsreel, and then kill her. But they didn't. They just kept treating the wounded. A German soldier with half his face blown away. An American private with shrapnel in his chest. No difference. No separation. Just medicine. A man approached, older, maybe 35, with tired eyes and steady hands. He wore a captain's insignia and a stethoscope around his neck. Guten Tag, he said in careful German. Ich bin Dr. Brenner. Good day. I am Dr. Brenner. Greta pulled back. Stay away from me. Brenner stopped. He didn't force it, didn't get angry. He just stood there patient and calm and spoke in slow, clear German. I need to see your arm. I won't hurt you. I'm a doctor. My job is to heal, not harm. Will you let me help you? Greta looked at his face. Searched for cruelty, for hatred, for the monster she had been promised. But all she saw was exhaustion and something that looked almost like kindness. Ilsa squeezed her hand. Let him look. Please, you're burning up. Greta nodded, just once, just barely. Brenner pulled on gloves and began to unwrap the bandage. The cloth stuck to her skin. He worked slowly, soaking each layer with saline to loosen it, murmuring reassurances in broken German. When the final layer came free, he set down his scissors and just stared. The wound ran from her wrist to halfway up her forearm. Jagged, deep. The kind of injury that happens when metal punches through flesh and carries dirt and fabric with it. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was what had grown inside it. The entire length of the cut had swollen. The skin around it was tight and shiny. Red streaks ran up toward her elbow like fingers reaching for her heart. And in the center, thick greenish-white pus pooled and oozed. Brenner touched the skin near the edge. It was hot. This is bad, he said in English, then switched to German. Your wound is spreading infection. If we don't clean this now, the infection will reach your blood. Do you understand? Greta nodded. Her lips trembled. Will you cut it off? Brenner looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at a German soldier, not at an enemy, at a terrified 19-year-old girl who thought she was about to lose her arm. Not if we move fast. He turned and called for a nurse. A woman appeared, brown hair, tied back kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes. She took one look at the wound and knew what was coming. Prepare for debridement, Brenner said. No anesthesia available for POWs unless it's life-threatening. Hayes hesitated. Sir, this looks pretty life-threatening to me. Not yet, but it will be if we wait. Get the instruments. Brenner turned back to Greta and explained what was about to happen. He would cut away the dead tissue, flush the wound with saline, pack it with sulfa powder. Then bandage it tight. If the infection stopped spreading, she would keep the arm. If it didn't, they would have to amputate within 24 hours. Do you understand? Greta nodded. Are you ready? She didn't answer. How could she be ready for this? For pain without mercy, for surgery without sleep, for trusting the enemy to save her instead of destroy her. But she looked at Brenner's eyes again, and she made a choice. If you lie to me, she said in halting English, I will never forgive you. Brenner met her gaze. I'm not lying. This will be the worst pain of your life. But you'll survive. Hayes brought a leather strap. Bite down on this. It helps. Greta took the strap. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped it, but she got it between her teeth and bit down hard. Brenner picked up the scalpel. On 3. 1, 2. He cut on 2. Greta screamed into the leather, her whole body going rigid, but Hayes held her shoulders and Brenner worked fast, cutting away gray-black tissue and exposing the red flesh underneath. Blood welled up, which was good because it meant the tissue was still alive. But the deeper he went, the worse it got. There were pockets of infection buried in the muscle, places where bacteria had tunneled in and created abscesses. Brenner had to open each one drain, it'd scrape out the dead material. Every time he did, Greta jerked, tears streaming down her face, the leather straps slick with blood from her bitten lip. Hayes sang softly, You are my sunshine, an old song gentle and sad. Greta didn't understand the words, but the melody cut through the pain, gave her something to focus on besides the knife. 41 minutes. That's how long it took. When Brenner finally stepped back, the wound was clean. Raw and bleeding, but no more pus, no more gray tissue. He packed it with white sulfa powder, layered on fresh gauze, wrapped it tight. You did it, he said. The worst part is over. Greta didn't respond. She just lay there, her face pale and wet with tears, staring at her bandaged arm, like she couldn't believe it was still attached to her body. They moved her to the prisoner ward, a section separated by canvas curtains and guarded by a single military policeman reading a comic book. 7 cots, 6 German soldiers. And now Greta. She lay down on the cot and turned her face to the wall. Everything hurt. Her arm, her head, her heart. But worse than the pain was the confusion. Because these Americans, these monsters she had been taught to fear and hate, had just spent 41 minutes saving her arm when they could have let her die or cut it off without trying. She thought about the bacon she hadn't eaten yet, about the chocolate Ilsa had shared, about Sergeant Bradley's kindness and Dr. Brenner's promise. And for the first time in 6 years, Greta Schultz began to wonder if everything she believed might be a lie. The fever strikes. Greta woke to darkness and heat. Not the heat of a warm room or a summer night, but the kind of heat that comes from inside, from something burning in your blood that shouldn't be burning. Her arm felt like someone had buried hot coals beneath the bandages. Her throat was sand. And when she tried to sit up, the room tilted sideways and kept tilting until she had to lie back down or fall. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was crying. No, not crying, moaning, a low animal sound of pain without words. It took her several seconds to realize the sound was coming from her own mouth. The canvas curtains snapped open. Hayes appeared backlit by the hallway lamps moving fast. She put her hand on Greta's forehead and pulled it back like she'd touched a stove. Jesus, you're burning up. Greta tried to speak, but her tongue wouldn't work right. The words came out in German, slurred and broken. Mutti, ich will nach Hause. Mutti, bitte. Mama, I want to go home. Mama, please. Hayes grabbed a thermometer, stuck it under Greta's tongue, waited. When she pulled it out and held it up to the light, her face went pale. 104.2. She turned and ran. Greta heard her footsteps echoing down the hallway, heard her shouting for someone, heard the sharp edge of panic in her voice that medical professionals learn to hide, but sometimes can't. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had stopped making sense. Greta floated in and out of consciousness, seeing her mother's face in the shadows, hearing Otto's voice telling her to be strong, feeling Ilsa's hand in hers, even though Ilsa was in a different camp now, and Greta was alone. Then Brenner was there, still in his undershirt, with his hair sticking up, his eyes red from interrupted sleep. He unwrapped the bandages with gentle hands. The wound looked better than before. Clean, no new drainage. But when he touched the skin around it, Greta could see his jaw tighten. The infection's in her bloodstream, he said to Hayes. His voice was quiet, clinical, the kind of quiet that means something terrible is happening. Red streaks are spreading, temperatures spiking. This isn't local anymore. It's systemic. Hayes stood beside him, her arms crossed tight against her chest. What do we do? Brenner stared at Greta's arm for a long moment. When he spoke, the words came slow and heavy. If the infection is in her blood, the only sure way to stop it is amputation. Cut off the source. Hope the sepsis doesn't kill her anyway. But you said you'd save the arm. I said I'd try. This is different. A third voice joined them. Major Thompson, the senior medical officer, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his face hard. She's a POW, Captain. We can't waste resources on maybes. Just take the arm and be done with it. Brenner didn't turn around. He kept staring at Greta's flushed face, at the way her eyes moved behind closed lids, at the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She's 19 years old, and she's German. She's the enemy. We've got American boys dying in surgery right now who need those resources more than she does. Those boys are stable. She's not. All the more reason to do the quick solution. Brenner turned then. The look on his face made Thompson take a step back. I made a promise to this girl. I told her I wouldn't take her arm unless there was no other option. And we're not there yet. You're risking her life on sentiment, number. I'm fighting for it. The two men stared at each other. Hayes held her breath. Somewhere in the ward, one of the German soldiers coughed, and the sound echoed in the silence. Finally, Thompson shook his head. 6 hours, Captain. You've got 6 hours to stabilize her. If the fever doesn't break by dawn, you take the arm. That's an order. He walked away. Brenner stood still for a moment, his hands curled into fists. Then he turned back to Greta and his face softened. Hayes, he said, quietly, set up IV fluids. I want a liter every 2 hours. Double the sulfa dosage, both topical and oral. Keep her arm elevated, and monitor her vitals every 30 minutes. What are you going to do? Wait, hope. Pray if you're the praying type. He pulled up a chair beside Greta's cot and sat down. Hayes wanted to tell him to rest asleep, that she could handle the monitoring. But she knew he wouldn't listen. So she just got to work. The 6-hour vigil hour 1. Greta's temperature climbed to 104.5. Hayes inserted the IV line into her left hand, the good hand, and started the saline drip. Brenner changed the bandages again, checking for any sign that the infection was getting worse. The wound itself looked stable, but the red streaks had crept another centimeter up her arm, like fingers crawling toward her heart. In the corner of the ward, Klaus Vogel lay awake on his cot, watching. He was 20 years old, captured 3 weeks ago. With shrapnel in his chest, a boy from Hamburg who still flinched at loud noises and cried sometimes in his sleep. He had watched the American doctors save his life when the German army had left him to die on a battlefield. And now he watched them fight to save this girl he didn't know, this radio operator from Kassel, who moaned in German about wanting to go home. Why do you try so hard? He asked in halting English. She is German. You are American. Brenner looked up from his notes. She's human. So am I. That's all that matters here. Vogel thought about that. Then he reached under his thin mattress and pulled out a piece of bread he'd saved from dinner. Hard brown bread, the kind the prisoners got, but bread nonetheless. He held it out to Hayes. For her. When she wakes, she will be hungry. Hayes took the bread, her eyes wet. Thank you. Hour 2. The temperature hit 104.7. Greta stopped mumbling and went silent, her breathing shallow, her skin so hot it hurt to touch. Hayes sponged her face with cool water over and over, while Brenner calculated dosages and recalculated them, trying to find the balance between enough medicine to fight the infection and too much medicine that would poison her kidneys. The door opened. Sergeant Bradley walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, American coffee, strong and black. He handed one to Brenner, one to Hayes. Heard you've been up all night. Thought you might need this. Brenner took the cup but didn't drink. You don't have to be here, Sergeant. I know. But that girl, Greta, she was so scared when we found her. Kept saying we were going to torture her. I told her we wouldn't. I'd like to be right about that. You are right about that. Then help her prove it. Bradley left. Brenner drank the coffee. It was terrible and perfect at the same time. Hour 3, 104.9. The peak. Greta's whole body shook with chills despite the fever, her teeth chattering, her muscles spasming. Hayes piled blankets on her while Brenner checked the red streaks again. They had stopped spreading, not shrinking, not fading, but not growing either. For the first time in 3 hours, something wasn't getting worse. He didn't say anything, didn't want to jinx it, just noted it in his chart and kept watching. Hour 4, 104.4, down half a degree. Brenner checked it twice to make sure the thermometer wasn't broken. Hayes saw his face and understood before he spoke. It's dropping, slowly. Could just be a fluctuation. But it's dropping. Yes. They looked at each other across Greta's still form. Neither of them smiled. It was too early for that. But something in the air changed. Fear became hope. Dread became possibility. Hour 5, 103.8, down another 6/10. Greta's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy, but open. She looked at Hayes, seemed to try to place her, then whispered something in German, too quiet to hear. Hayes leaned close. Water, please. Hayes held a cup to her lips. Greta drank in tiny sips, each one an effort, each one a victory. When she finished, she looked at Hayes again, and this time there was recognition in her eyes. You stayed. It wasn't a question. Just an observation said with the kind of wonder that comes from having your expectations shattered. Of course I stayed. You're my patient. Greta's eyes closed again, but this time it looked like sleep instead of unconsciousness. Hour 6, 102.1. When dawn light started creeping through the factory windows, painting everything golden gray, Greta's temperature had dropped below 102 for the first time since midnight. The red streaks had faded from angry crimson to dull pink. Her breathing had steadied, and when Brenner unwrapped the bandages one more time, the wound looked exactly like it should look after 3 days of healing. Pink at the edges, no pus, no smell. Just a body doing what bodies do when you give them the right help. Brenner sat back in his chair. He rubbed his face with both hands. Then he looked at Hayes and allowed himself the smallest smile. She's going to make it. You kept your promise. We kept our promise. He stood up, stretched, felt every one of his 34 years in his back and knees. Outside, the morning shift was arriving. Fresh nurses, fresh doctors, a new day in a war that kept grinding forward, whether anyone was ready or not. But in this room, in this moment, the war had lost. One girl who should have died didn't. One arm that should have been amputated wasn't. One promise that could have been broken held. Thompson appeared in the doorway, saw Greta sleeping peacefully, saw the chart in Brenner's hand, saw the exhaustion and triumph mixed on his face. Well, fever broke at 0600. Infection is retreating. She'll keep the arm. Thompson was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Good work, Captain. He left without another word. Brenner turned to Hayes. Go get some sleep. I'll stay with her. You need sleep too. I'll sleep when she's stable for 12 hours. Go. Hayes went. Brenner pulled his chair closer to Greta's cot and sat down again. He didn't have to stay. Could have gone to his tent, collapsed on his bunk, slept for the first time in 18 hours. But he had learned long ago that you don't leave a patient when they're still climbing out of the valley. You stay until they're standing on solid ground. So he stayed. The POW ward. 3 days later, Greta could sit up without help. 4 days later, she could eat solid food. 5 days later, she could walk the length of the ward without getting dizzy. And on day 6, everything changed. The prisoner ward held 7 people, 6 German soldiers, all men, all captured under different circumstances, and Greta. They shared the same canvas enclosed space, the same guards, the same uncertain future. But they did not share the same perspective. Sergeant Otto Stahl sat on his cot with his broken leg elevated, his face set in permanent disapproval. He was 32, old enough to remember the Weimar Republic, young enough to have believed in the promises of the new order. He had fought in Poland and France, and Russia had been wounded twice before this, and had the kind of rigid certainty that comes from never questioning anything. He did not like that the girl got extra attention. Did not like that the nurses changed her bandages daily while his cast got checked once a week. Did not like that she received the same food rations as the combat soldiers, despite being, in his estimation, barely even military. On day 7, he complained, loudly, in German directed at Corporal Davies, the MP, who couldn't understand a word, but understood the tone perfectly. Why does this girl get better treatment? She's not even a real soldier, just a radio operator. We did the fighting, we deserve the resources. Klaus Vogel, lying on his cot with his healing chest wound, spoke quietly. We all get the same treatment, Stahl, the same food, the same medicine. Stop making problems. She gets her bandages changed every day. Because her wound was infected. Mine was too at first. They changed mine every day until it healed. Now they check it twice a week. That's how medicine works. It's wasteful. She's a woman. Women shouldn't have been in uniform in the first place. This is what happens when you put women where they don't belong. Greta had been quiet up until that moment, lying on her side with her back to the room, trying to ignore Stahl, like she had ignored difficult men her entire life. But something in his words, in the casual dismissal, in the implication that she was somehow responsible for Germany's failure, snapped something inside her. She sat up, turned to face him, and spoke in German with a clarity that cut through the room like a blade. You think I wanted to be there? Stahl blinked. Surprised, she had responded. What? You think Ilse wanted to be there, or Anna or Margaret, or any of the 28 girls in my unit? You think we chose to stand in bunkers for 12 hours while bombs fell? You think we volunteered to run through forests with no food because the trucks you were supposed to protect got destroyed? That's not the same thing. No, it's worse. Because we were there because you failed. You and every German man who swore to protect the fatherland. Where were you when the Americans crossed the Rhine? Where were you when my father died at Smolensk? Where were you when we needed you? She stood up, wavering slightly, but standing, and took 2 steps towards Stahl's cot. Don't you dare tell me I'm not a real soldier. I did my duty. I followed orders. I held my post until there was no post left to hold. What did you do? Break your leg in a Jeep accident? The room went silent. Even Davies, who understood no German, felt the shift in atmosphere and stopped reading his comic book. Stahl's face turned red. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Vogel started clapping, slow, deliberate grinning. Friedrich Mann, the former teacher who rarely spoke, nodded with something that looked like respect. Stahl looked around, found no support, and turned his face to the wall. Greta sat back down on her cot. Her hands were shaking, her arm throbbed. But something about her felt lighter than it had in years. Hayes had been standing outside the canvas curtain listening. Her German was basic, but she had caught enough to understand. When Greta glanced up and saw her there, Hayes gave her a small nod and the hint of a smile. Good for you, she said quietly in English. Greta didn't understand in all the words, but she understood the tone. The conversations that mattered. That night after lights out, Vogel spoke into the darkness. Do you really think we were lied to? Greta lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, her bandaged arm resting on her chest. Look around. We were told Americans torture prisoners. Instead, they gave me surgery without asking for anything in return. They saved my arm when they could have just cut it off. They feed us the same food their own soldiers eat. What do you think? A long silence. I think I was a fool, Vogel said finally. We were all fools. That's how propaganda works. It makes fools of honest people. Another voice joined them. Friedrich Mann, speaking for the first time in days. I was a teacher before the war. History and civics at a gymnasium in Frankfurt. I taught children that Jews were subhuman, that Slavs were animals, that the Führer would lead us to 1,000 years of glory. He paused. In the darkness, they could hear him breathing heavy and uneven. I believed it. God help me. I believed every word. And I taught those children to believe it too. How many of them are dead now because they believed what I taught them? You didn't know, Greta said softly. That's not an excuse. I should have known. I was educated. I read books. I had access to information. But I chose to believe the easy lie instead of asking the hard questions. Can we fix it? Vogel asked. Can we undo what we believed? I don't know. But we have to try. Because if we don't, if we go home and just pretend none of this happened, then we're no better than the people who lied to us. The next morning, Hayes brought something unexpected. A magazine. Life dated May 1945, with a photograph on the cover of an American soldier giving bread to German children. She set it on Greta's cot without explanation. Greta opened it carefully. The pages were glossy, full of photographs in crisp black and white. American cities, American factories, American families. Everything looked clean, prosperous, unbroken. Then she turned a page and found the photographs from Buchenwald. The concentration camp had been liberated 3 weeks earlier. The photographers had documented everything. Skeletal men in striped uniforms, mountains of shoes, ovens, bodies stacked like cordwood. Greta stared at the images. Her hands started shaking. She had never seen photographs like this. In Germany, such things were not published, not spoken about, not acknowledged. She made it halfway to the latrine before she vomited. When she came back pale and trembling, Hayes was sitting on her cot, the magazine closed. "I'm sorry, I should have warned you." Greta sat down slowly. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believe you. But I should have known. I should have asked questions. Should have wondered where all the Jews went. Should have noticed that the camps they told us were for work kept getting bigger and no one ever came back." Hayes reached out and took Greta's hand. "You were a child when this started. You trusted the adults in your life to tell you the truth. That's not your fault. But now I know, and I can never unknow it." "No, you can't. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Greta looked at the magazine at the cover with the American soldier and the German children at the promise of kindness in a world full of cruelty. "I'll tell the truth. However long it takes. Whatever it costs. I'll tell the truth." That night, lying in the darkness with her arm aching and her heart heavier than it had ever been, Greta thought about her oath. Death before dishonor. She had said those words with her hand over her heart and meant them. But she understood now that dishonor didn't mean becoming a prisoner. Dishonor meant believing lies and spreading them. Dishonor meant closing your eyes to truth because truth was uncomfortable. Dishonor meant choosing the easy answer over the right one. She whispered into the darkness in German, knowing no one would hear or understand but needing to say it anyway. "I renounce my oath. I was wrong. We were all wrong." And for the first time since she had stood in that training hall in Hamburg and sworn allegiance to a lie, Greta Schultz felt free. Day 8 arrived with morning light that seemed brighter than before. Greta woke feeling stronger, clearer, like someone had wiped fog from a window she'd been looking through her entire life. Her arms still ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that meant healing, not dying. Hayes appeared at 0700 with breakfast, but this time something was different. This time Greta was ready. The metal tray held the same meal it always did. 3 strips of bacon, their edges crispy and curled. Scrambled eggs still steaming, yellow and fluffy. A thick slice of white bread with butter melting into its porous surface. Coffee with real cream swirling on top like a tiny galaxy. But now Greta understood what this meal meant. She picked up the first strip of bacon, held it between her fingers, felt the residual warmth, the slight grease coating her skin. This wasn't just food. This was abundance. This was a country so wealthy it could afford to give its enemies the same breakfast its soldiers ate. This was everything she'd been told was a lie made solid and real and undeniable. She bit down. The taste exploded across her tongue just like it had the first time. Salt and smoke and richness. But this time she was ready for the tears. Let them come. Let them wash away 6 years of poison. Hayes sat beside her, quiet and present. "The first time I tasted this," Greta said in careful English, "I cried because I didn't understand. Now I cry because I do." "What do you understand?" "That they lied. About everything, about America, about you, about what kindness looks like." She took another bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. "We were told Americans were starving, that you had no food, that if we became prisoners you would make us eat rats and dirt." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Who told you that?" "My teachers. My father. The officers. Everyone. For 6 years the same lie over and over until it became truth. Or what I thought was truth." Greta looked at the eggs, at the bread, at the abundance that made no sense if the propaganda had been real. "But this," she gestured at the tray, "this is better than anything I ever had in Germany, even before the war, even when we were supposed to be the master race building paradise." "Because it was never about building paradise," Hayes said gently. "It was about control. And the best way to control people is to make them afraid of the alternative." Greta nodded. She understood now. understood in a way that felt like grief and liberation mixed together. Every morning when I eat this bacon, I remember how wrong I was. And I promise myself I'll never be that wrong again. Day 21 arrived with morning light filtering through the factory windows, turning the dust motes into tiny stars. Greta woke before the others as she had every morning since the fever broke and lay still on her cot listening to the sounds of the hospital coming to life. Footsteps in the hallway. The clank of metal breakfast trays. Someone coughing 3 beds over. The ordinary music of survival. Her arm no longer hurt. Not the sharp burning pain of infection anyway. Just a dull ache that reminded her the wound was still healing, would always be healing in some way. She flexed her fingers slowly, watching them curl and straighten, still amazed that they worked at all. Hayes appeared at 0700 with breakfast. The same breakfast Greta had eaten every morning for 2 weeks. Bacon, eggs, bread, coffee. Each time it tasted like a small miracle. Each time it reminded her of how completely she had been deceived. Today's different, Hayes said, setting the tray down. Dr. Brenner wants to see you after you eat. Final examination before transfer. Transfer. You are healed enough to move to a permanent camp. There's a processing facility in France. Repatriation center. That's where POWs go while they wait to go home. The word home sat heavy in the air between them. Greta picked up a piece of bacon but didn't eat it. I don't want to leave. Hayes sat on the edge of the cot, something she had done many times over the past 3 weeks, close enough to be present, but far enough to give space. Why not? Because here I learned the truth. Out there beyond these walls, I don't know what's waiting. More lies, maybe. Or people who will hate me for knowing the truth. Or Germany itself, which might not even exist anymore the way I remember it. The truth doesn't go away just because you change locations. It stays with you. In here. Hayes tapped her own chest over her heart. You carry it with you, and you share it when you can. That's all any of us can do. Greta ate her breakfast slowly, savoring each bite, knowing it might be the last time she tasted American bacon for years. Maybe forever. When she finished, Hayes walked her down the hallway to the examination room where this had all begun 3 weeks ago. Brenner stood at the metal table organizing instruments, his movements precise and practiced. He looked up when they entered and smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that came from a man who had seen too much suffering, but still found reasons to be glad. Good morning, Greta. How's the arm? She held it up, rotating it slowly to show the range of motion. Better, stronger every day. Good. Let me take a look. She sat on the table, the same table where she had screamed into a leather strap while he cut away dying tissue and let him unwrap the bandages. The wound had closed completely now. What remained was a scar, thick and pink and slightly raised, running from her wrist to halfway up her forearm. 7 inches of permanent reminder. Brenner examined it carefully, pressing gently on the muscle, checking for any sign of infection or weakness. His hands were steady and professional, but there was something else in his touch. Care. Genuine concern for her well-being that had nothing to do with her being German or American or anything except human. You're fully healed, he said finally. The scar will fade over time. Might always be a bit darker than the surrounding skin, but that's normal. Muscle function is about 85%. Should improve to 90 or 95 with regular use. You'll have some weakness, but nothing that will stop you from living a normal life. He wrapped a fresh bandage around it, lighter than before, more protection than treatment. You can take this off in a week. After that, keep the area clean and moisturized. The scar tissue will be sensitive to cold for a while. He stepped back, pulled off his gloves, and for the first time since she had met him, looked uncertain. I need to tell you something about why I fought so hard to save your arm. You don't have to explain. You're a doctor. It's your job. It's more than that. He sat down on a stool, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. I had a wife, Martha. We married young right out of medical school. She was a nurse. We were going to open a practice together after I finished my residency. He paused, and Greta saw the pain flicker across his face. In 1942, she developed appendicitis. Simple surgery usually, but it got infected. We didn't have enough penicillin. The local hospital was rationing it for military personnel. She died of sepsis 3 days after the surgery. I'm sorry, Greta whispered. She made me promise something before she died. Made me swear that I would save everyone I could. That I would never let someone die from an infection if I had the power to stop it. So when I saw your arm, when I saw that infection spreading, I didn't see a German soldier. I saw Martha, and I heard her voice telling me to save you. He looked up, met Greta's eyes. You're not my enemy. You're a patient, and every patient I save is a promise kept to the woman I loved. Greta felt tears running down her face. She didn't try to stop them. I wish I had met you 6 years ago. Maybe I would have learned the truth sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have believed the lies. Maybe. Or maybe you needed to go through exactly what you went through to understand what truth really means. I don't know. I just know that you're alive and you're going to stay alive, and what you do with that life matters. What should I do? Tell your story. Tell people what you learned here. Tell them that kindness is stronger than propaganda, that humanity survives even in war. Tell them about bacon and chocolate and a doctor who kept his promise. Brenner stood up, extended his hand. Greta took it, felt the firm warmth of his grip, and understood that this handshake meant more than any oath she had ever sworn. Good luck, Greta Schultz. Build a good life. Make it worth the sacrifice. I will. I promise. Letter from Ilsa Hayes found Greta in the ward packing the few possessions she had accumulated. A clean uniform donated by the Red Cross, a toothbrush, a comb, a small notebook and pencil she had been using to write down her thoughts in German. Not much to show for 3 weeks of transformation. Before you go, Hayes said, holding out an envelope. This arrived yesterday. Took a while to get here through the military post system. Greta took the envelope with shaking hands. The return address was written in familiar handwriting. Ilse Hartmann, Camp Rheinberg, American Sector, Germany. She sat on the cot and opened it carefully as if the paper might disintegrate. Inside was a single sheet covered in Ilse's looping script. My dear Greta, the letter began. They told me you were alive, that your arm was saved. I cannot tell you how happy I am. When they separated us at the river, I thought I would never know what happened to you. I feared the worst. I am being treated well here. The Americans feed us. Real food, Greta. Bread and meat and vegetables. Sometimes even dessert. I have gained 5 kilograms. I hardly recognize myself in the mirror. But more than that, I have learned things. Terrible things about what our government did. About the camps. About the murders. I saw photographs that made me sick. I cried for 3 days. We were lied to, Greta. About everything. The Americans are not monsters. The Jews were not our enemies. The Fuhrer was not our savior. Everything we believed was poison. I don't know who I am anymore. The girl who sang in the bunker and believed in victory seems like a stranger. But maybe that's good. Maybe we need to become strangers to ourselves so we can become better people. They say we will be released soon, sent home to whatever home still exists. I want to find you when we get back. I want us to build something new together. A Germany that tells the truth. A Germany that remembers what happened and refuses to let it happen again. Write to me if you can. My mother's address in Bremen is at the bottom of this letter. If I survive this, if you survive this, we will find each other. Your friend, always, Ilsa. Greta read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket over her heart. Is she okay? Hayes asked. Yes, she's alive. She's learning the same truths I learned, and she wants to build something better. That's a good friend, the best. You'll see her again. I'm sure of it. Greta looked at Hayes, at this American woman who had sat beside her through the worst night of her life, who had sung to her in a language she didn't understand, who had shown her more kindness than Greta had ever shown to anyone she considered an enemy. Thank you, she said in English, the words careful but clear. Thank you for saving my body and my soul. Hayes smiled and her eyes were wet. We didn't save your soul. You did that yourself. The goodbye. 2 military policemen arrived at 10:00 hours to escort Greta to the transport truck. One of them was Corporal Davies, who had guarded the prisoner ward for 3 weeks and had learned to recognize the difference between complaints that mattered and complaints that didn't. The other was a private Greta didn't know, young and nervous, holding his rifle like he expected trouble. Ready, Davies asked. Greta nodded. She stood up from her cot for the last time, shouldered her small pack, and walked toward the canvas curtain. But before she left, she turned back to the 6 men still lying in their beds. Vogel raised his hand in a small wave. Tell the truth, he called out in German. Make them understand. I will. Friedrich Mann nodded solemnly, his eyes saying what his mouth didn't. Stahl said nothing, but he wasn't glaring anymore. That was something. She walked through the hospital, past the rows of wounded soldiers, past the operating rooms where Brander was already working on the next patient, past the supply closet where she had first vomited after seeing the magazine photographs. Hayes walked beside her, quiet and present. At the main entrance, a deuce-and-a-half truck sat idling its canvas cover, rolled back wooden benches visible inside. 12 other German POWs were already seated, all men, all looking hollow-eyed and uncertain. "This is where I leave you," Hayes said. Greta turned to face her fully. Then, without thinking about protocol or propriety or the rules that said prisoners and captors should maintain distance, she stepped forward and hugged Hayes tightly. Hayes stiffened for just a second, then relaxed and hugged back. When Greta pulled away, both of them were crying. "I will never forget you," Greta said. "Never. Go build that new Germany. Make it worth all this. I promise." Greta climbed into the truck, found a space on the bench, set her pack at her feet. The engine rumbled, gears ground, and the truck lurched forward. As they pulled away from the hospital, Greta looked back through the opening in the canvas. Hayes stood at the entrance, one hand raised in farewell. Behind her, the factory building that had been converted into a place of healing where promises were kept and lies were shattered. The truck turned a corner, and the hospital disappeared from view. Beside Greta, an older prisoner, maybe 40, with a bandaged head and hollow cheeks, spoke in German. "Where are we going, France?" "Processing center. Then home eventually?" "Home." The man laughed bitterly. "What home? Germany is rubble. The Reich is dead. We have nothing." Greta touched her arm, felt the scar under the bandage, felt the strength returning to muscles that should have been amputated. "We have truth. That's something. Truth doesn't feed you, doesn't keep you warm." "No, but it's the foundation you build everything else on. Without truth, you're just building on lies, and lies always collapse eventually." The man looked at her like she was insane. Maybe she was. Maybe believing in truth after everything that had happened was a kind of madness. But it was the only madness that made sense. Epilogue. The Letters and the Legacy. October 1945. 6 months after Germany's surrender. Sarah Hayes sat in her quarters at the occupation headquarters in Frankfurt sorting through mail. Most of it was official, orders and reports and bureaucratic necessities. But one envelope stood out: German postage, careful handwriting, return address in Kassel. She opened it carefully. "Dear Lieutenant Hayes," the letter began in German, translated into English by a clerk. "I am home, or at least I am in what remains of Kassel. The city is rubble. My mother's house is gone, destroyed in a bombing raid in March. My mother died in the blast. I learned this from a neighbor who survived in a cellar. I have nowhere to live except with Ilse, who found me 3 weeks after my return. Her family's house in Bremen still stands, and she has taken me in. Every morning I make myself eggs and bread. I cannot afford bacon, but I remember the taste. I remember your kindness. I remember Dr. Brenner's promise. I have told 37 people about how the Americans treated me. Some believe me. Some call me a traitor. Some say I am naive or brainwashed or worse. But I keep telling the story because it's true, and truth matters more than popularity. I am learning to live with my scar. It aches in cold weather. People stare at it sometimes and ask what happened. I tell them the truth, that I was wounded by my own side's propaganda more deeply than any piece of shrapnel could have wounded me, and that an American doctor healed both wounds. Thank you for showing me what America really means. Not the propaganda version, not the enemy we were taught to fear, but the real America built on values that matter: kindness, dignity, the belief that every human being deserves a chance. I will tell this story until my last breath. With deepest gratitude, Greta Schultz. Hayes read the letter 3 times. Then she pulled out paper and wrote back. December 1945. William Brenner sat in his office in Pittsburgh, the civilian practice he had reopened after returning home. Outside, snow fell on streets that had never seen bombs, on buildings that stood intact, on people who had no idea what the rest of the world looked like. A letter arrived, forwarded from the Army, postmarked Kassel. "Dear Captain Brenner," it read, "I hope this letter finds you well and that you have returned safely to your family. I wanted you to know that your promise was kept in more ways than you intended. You saved my arm, but you also saved my capacity to believe in human goodness. I am home now, living with my dear friend Ilse. Germany is broken. We have little food, little heat, little hope. But I have truth, and I have my arm which grows stronger every day. I can write, I can work, I can build. The scar you gave me is a reminder, not of pain, but of the moment when everything I believed shattered and something better took its place. Every time I look at it, I remember that some promises are worth keeping even for your enemies. You told me that every patient you save is a promise kept to your wife. I want you to know that you kept another promise too. The promise that humanity can survive war. That kindness is not weakness. That medicine has no borders. I am telling your story to everyone who will listen. The doctor who fought to save the arm of a German girl because he made a promise. The doctor who saw a patient instead of an enemy. Thank you for seeing me, not as a German, not as a prisoner, but as a human being who deserved a chance. Your patient always, Greta Schultz. Brenner set the letter down on his desk, looked out the window at the falling snow, and for the first time since Martha died, he felt like the debt had been paid. Not erased, never erased, but balanced by something good in a world that desperately needed good things. He wrote back that same day. The reunion 50 years later. 1998. Sarah Hayes died peacefully in her sleep at her home in Columbus, Ohio. She was 81 years old. She had served in Korea after World War II, then worked as a nursing instructor for 30 years, teaching generations of young nurses that medicine has no borders and compassion has no limits. Her daughter, Margaret Hayes Thompson, spent weeks sorting through her mother's belongings, clothes and books and photographs, letters from friends and colleagues, certificates and awards. And then in a wooden box in the back of a closet, she found 47 letters tied with ribbon, all from the same person. Greta Schultz later. Greta Schultz Hartman, written between 1945 and 1995. Margaret read them in order sitting on her mother's bedroom floor, tears streaming down her face. The first letter from October 45 talked about returning to Castle and finding nothing but rubble. The fifth letter from April 46 described reuniting with Ilsa and deciding to live together to build a life from the ashes. The 10th letter from December 48 mentioned starting work as a translator for the American occupation forces using her English to bridge the gap between enemies who needed to become allies. The 20th letter from June 56 celebrated the birth of Greta's first child, a daughter named Sarah, after the nurse who had sung to her in her darkest hour. The 30th letter from September 68 mourned Ilsa's death from cancer and talked about carrying on their shared mission to tell the truth. The 47th and final letter, dated May 1995, was written in shaky handwriting, the words of a woman whose body was failing, but whose spirit remained strong. Dear Sarah, it said, I am 69 years old now. My hair is white. My hands shake. The scar on my arm has faded to a thin line barely visible unless you know to look for it. But I have never forgotten. Ilsa passed last year, cancer, the same disease that is slowly taking me now. But before she died, we had 50 years together. 50 years of telling the truth, of teaching young Germans about the dangers of propaganda and the importance of questioning what you're told. My children ask me about the war. I tell them about a doctor and a nurse who saved my life, not with medicine alone, but with kindness. I tell them about bacon that tasted like truth. I tell them that America's greatest weapon was never its bombs or its soldiers, but its values. Thank you for showing me what those values mean. Thank you for staying beside me through the fever. Thank you for singing when I was too scared to breathe. Thank you for treating me like a human being when I had been taught that I was the enemy. I don't know if this letter will reach you. I don't know if you're still alive or if you remember a frightened German girl from 50 years ago. But I needed to write it anyway. Needed you to know that your kindness echoed across decades. That it changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone I told. I will tell this story until my last breath. And maybe if there is anything after this life, I will tell it then too. With love and eternal gratitude, Greta Schultz Hartman. Margaret sat on the floor holding the letter, crying for a mother who had never mentioned these letters, who had carried this correspondence quietly for 50 years without ever seeking recognition or praise. She searched online for Greta Schultz Hartman, found an obituary from February 1996 posted on a German memorial website. Greta Schultz Hartman, age 70, passed peacefully at her home in Kassel, Germany, surrounded by family. Born September 1926. Survived by 2 children and 5 grandchildren. Greta spent her life as a translator and educator, teaching young Germans about the dangers of propaganda and the importance of truth. She often spoke of an American doctor and nurse who saved her life during World War II, and she dedicated her work to ensuring that the horrors of that war would never be repeated. Her favorite saying was, "Some promises are worth keeping, even for your enemies." She will be deeply missed. Margaret called her own daughter that night. "I need you to help me find someone," she said. "A doctor who served in World War II. William Brenner from Pittsburgh." The meeting of grandchildren. 2015, 70 years after the war ended. Anna Hartman, 28 years old, granddaughter of Greta Schultz. Hartman stepped off a plane at Pittsburgh International Airport carrying a leather satchel and a mission. She had spent 6 months tracking down information, reading her grandmother's letters which her mother had kept, searching archives, making phone calls, following a trail that led from Kassel to Columbus to Pittsburgh. William Brenner had died in 2003 at the age of 92, but his grandson David Brenner, 35, still lived in Pittsburgh and still had his grandfather's journals and medical records. They met at a coffee shop in the city center. 2 strangers connected by a promise made 70 years ago in a converted factory in Germany. Anna opened her satchel and pulled out a photograph. Greta in 1994, age 68, sitting in her garden in Kassel, her left arm visible in the sunlight, the scar faded but still present. "This is my grandmother," Anna said in careful English. "She died when I was 2, but my mother told me her story, about the infection, about the doctor who saved her arm, about the promise." David reached into his own bag and pulled out a leather-bound journal, opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. April 15th, 1945. The entry read in Brenner's precise handwriting, "Patient Greta Schultz. Severe infection left forearm. Successful debridement without amputation. Post-operative sepsis managed with aggressive fluid therapy and sulfa. Patient stable. Prognosis good. Promise kept." The 2 of them sat across from each other, looking at a photograph and a journal entry, tangible proof that kindness had happened in a world built on cruelty, that promises had been kept when breaking them would have been easier. "She spent 50 years telling your grandfather's story," Anna said, "teaching people that propaganda is a lie, and that humanity can survive even the darkest times. She said that bacon and kindness saved her more than any medicine ever could." "He never talked about it much," David said, "but I found something in his papers after he died. A letter he wrote but never sent." "Want to hear it?" Anna nodded. David unfolded a piece of yellowed paper and read, "To whom it may concern, my name is William Brenner. I am a doctor. During World War II, I treated a German prisoner named Greta Schultz. I saved her arm because I made a promise to my dying wife that I would save everyone I could. But Greta saved something in me too. She reminded me that the enemy is just a label. Underneath, we're all just people trying to survive. I hope she lived well. I hope she found peace, and I hope that somewhere, somehow she understood that the promise went both ways. She kept me human in a war that tried to make us all into monsters." The coffee shop noise faded into background. 2 people sat in silence, crying quietly, connected across generations by a scar and a promise and the stubborn belief that truth matters more than victory. "Your grandmother changed lives," David said finally. "My grandfather never forgot her. Your grandfather gave my grandmother a reason to believe in humanity. She never forgot him either." They talked for 3 hours, shared stories, looked at photographs and journal entries and letters, pieced together a narrative that had been fragmented across decades and continents. When they finally parted ways, Anna gave David a copy of her grandmother's favorite photograph. Greta holding up her scarred arm in the garden, smiling at the camera, alive and strong and true. David gave Anna a copy of his grandfather's medical journal entry, proof that the promise had been real. "Tell your children this story," Anna said. "Please, the world needs to know that kindness won when cruelty could have." "I will. And you tell yours." They shook hands, then like Greta and Hayes 70 years before they hugged. The final words: Greta Schultz was one of 8,000 German women held as prisoners of war by American forces during World War II. Her story is not unique. Thousands of German prisoners discovered the same truth she did, that the enemy they had been taught to fear was more humane than the government they had served. That propaganda is a poor substitute for reality. That kindness is stronger than hate. But what makes her story worth remembering is not that it was extraordinary. It's that it was ordinary. The default, the system even in wartime, even with enemies, even when resources were scarce, defaulted to treatment, defaulted to care, defaulted to the belief that every human life has value. That default didn't come from exceptional people. It came from ordinary doctors and nurses who followed their oaths, from sergeants who gave chocolate instead of cruelty, from a system built on values that said medicine has no borders and humanity has no limits. The bacon didn't just feed Greta's body, it fed a truth that she carried for 50 years. That America's greatest weapon was never its bombs or its soldiers, but its values. And those values represented by a doctor who kept a promise, and a nurse who sang in the darkness, and a sergeant who chose kindness, those values won the war long before the last shot was fired. Greta's scar faded, but her memory never did. In a world that still struggles with propaganda and lies with hatred and division, with the temptation to see enemies instead of human beings, her story remains a reminder. That truth matters, that promises matter, that kindness, even small kindness, can echo across generations. Some promises are worth keeping, even for your enemies, especially for your enemies, because in the end there are no enemies, just people, and people deserve to be saved.